Early life. Franklin was born on Milk Street in Boston, Massachusetts on January 17, 1706, Note 1, and baptized at Old South Meeting House. As a child growing up along the Charles River, Franklin recalled that he was generally the leader among the boys. 16. Franklin's father wanted him to attend school with the clergy but only had enough money to send him to school for 2 years. He attended Boston Latin School but did not graduate. He continued his education through voracious reading. Although his parents talked to the church as a career, 17, for Franklin, his schooling ended when he was 10. He worked for his father for a time, and at 12 he became an apprentice to his brother James, a printer, who taught him the printing trade. When Benjamin was 15, James founded the New England Courant, which was one of the first American newspapers. When denied the chance to write a letter to the paper for publication, Franklin adopted the pseudonym of Silence Dogood, a middle-aged widow. Mrs. Dogood's letters were published and became a subject of conversation around town. Neither James nor the Courant's readers were aware of the ruse, and James was unhappy with Benjamin when he discovered the popular correspondent was his younger brother. Franklin was an advocate of free speech from an early age. When his brother was jailed for 3 weeks in 1722 for publishing material unflattering to the governor, young Franklin took over the newspaper and had Mrs. Dogood, quoting Cotto's letters, proclaim, "Without freedom of thought there can be no such thing as wisdom and no such thing as public liberty without freedom of speech." 18. Franklin left his apprenticeship without his brother's permission, and in so doing became a fugitive. 19. Moved to Philadelphia at age 17, Franklin ran away to Philadelphia, seeking a new start in a new city. When he first arrived, he worked in several printer shops around town, but he was not satisfied by the immediate prospects. After a few months, while working in a printing house, Pennsylvania Governor Sir William Keith convinced him to go to London, ostensibly to acquire the equipment necessary for establishing another newspaper in Philadelphia. Discovering that Keith's promises of backing a newspaper were empty, he worked as a typesetter in a printer's shop in what is now the Church of St. Bartholomew the Great in the Smithfield area of London. Following this, he returned to Philadelphia in 1726 with the help of Thomas Denham, a merchant who employed him as a clerk, shopkeeper, and bookkeeper in his business. 19. Junto and Library. In 1727, at age 21, Franklin formed the Junto, a group of like-minded aspiring artisans and tradesmen who hoped to improve themselves while they improved their community. The Junto was a discussion group for issues of the day. It subsequently gave rise to many organizations in Philadelphia. 20. The Junto was modeled after English coffee houses that Franklin knew well and which had become the center of the spread of Enlightenment ideas in Britain. 21-22. Reading was a great pastime of the Junto, but books were rare and expensive. The members created a library initially assembled from their own books after Franklin wrote. This did not suffice, however. Franklin conceived the idea of a subscription library, which would pool the funds of the members to buy books for all to read. This was the birth of the Library Company of Philadelphia. Its charter was composed by him in 1731. In 1732, he hired the first American librarian, Louis Timothy. The Library Company is now a great scholarly and research library. 24. Newspaperman. Upon Denham's death, Franklin returned to his former trade. In 1728, He set up a printing house in partnership with Hugh Meredith. The following year he became the publisher of a newspaper called the Pennsylvania Gazette. The Gazette gave Franklin a forum for agitation about a variety of local reforms and initiatives through printed essays and observations. Over time, his commentary, and his adroit cultivation of a positive image as an industrious and intellectual young man, earned him a great deal of social respect. But even after he achieved fame as a scientist and statesman, he habitually signed his letters with the unpretentious B. Franklin, printer. 19. In 1732, he published the first German-language newspaper in America, Die Philadelphische Zeitung, although it failed after only 1 year because 4 other newly founded German papers quickly dominated the newspaper market. 25. Franklin also printed Moravian religious books in German. He often visited Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, staying at the Moravian Sun Inn. 26. In a 1751 pamphlet on demographic growth and its implications for the 13 colonies, he called the Pennsylvania Germans Palatine Boers, who could never acquire the complexion of Anglo-American settlers, and referred to blacks and tawnies as weakening the social structure of the colonies. Although he apparently reconsidered shortly thereafter, and the phrases were omitted from all later printings of the pamphlet, his views may have played a role in his political defeat in 1764. 27. According to Ralph Frosca, Franklin promoted the printing press as a device to instruct colonial Americans in moral virtue. Frosca argues he saw this as a service to God, because he understood moral virtue in terms of actions, thus, doing good provides a service to God. Despite his own moral lapses, Franklin saw himself as uniquely qualified to instruct Americans in morality. He tried to influence American moral life through the construction of a printing network based on a chain of partnerships from the Carolinas to New England. He thereby invented the first newspaper chain. Citation needed, it was more than a business venture, for like many publishers he believed that the press had a public service duty. 28-29. When he established himself in Philadelphia, shortly before 1730, the town boasted 2 wretched little news sheets, Andrew Bradford's The American Weekly Mercury, and Samuel Keimer's Universal Instructor in All Arts and Sciences, and Pennsylvania Gazette. 30. This instruction in all arts and sciences consisted of weekly extracts from Chambers's Universal Dictionary. Franklin quickly did away with all of this when he took over the Instructor and made it the Pennsylvania Gazette. The Gazette soon became his characteristic organ, which he freely used for satire, for the play of his wit, even for sheer excess of mischief or of fun. From the first, he had a way of adapting his models to his own uses. The series of essays called The Busy Body, which he wrote for Bradford's American Mercury in 1729, followed the general Addisonian form, already modified to suit homelier conditions. The thrifty Patience, in her busy little shop, complaining of the useless visitors who waste her valuable time, is related to the women who address Mr. Spectator. The busy body himself is a true censor morum, as Isaac Bickerstaff had been in the Tatler. And a number of the fictitious characters, Ridentius, Eugenius, Cato, and Credico, represent traditional 18th century classicism. Even this Franklin could use for contemporary satire, since Credico, the sour philosopher, is evidently a portrait of his rival, Samuel Keimer. 31. Franklin had mixed success in his plan to establish an intercolonial network of newspapers that would produce a profit for him and disseminate virtue. Over the years he sponsored 24 printers in Pennsylvania, South Carolina, New York, Connecticut and even the Caribbean. By 1753, 8 of the 15 English-language newspapers in the colonies were published by him or his partners. 32 he began in Charleston, South Carolina, in 1731. After his second editor died, the widow Elizabeth Timothy took over and made it a success. She was one of the colonial era's first woman printers. 33 For 3 decades Franklin maintained a close business relationship with her and her son Peter Timothy, who took over the South Carolina Gazette in 1746. 34. The Gazette was impartial in political debates, while creating the opportunity for public debate, which encouraged others to challenge authority. Timothy avoided blandness and crude bias and after 1765 increasingly took a patriotic stand in the growing crisis with Great Britain. 35 However, Franklin's Connecticut Gazette, 1755-68, proved unsuccessful. 36 As the Revolution approached, political strife slowly tore his network apart. 37 Freemasonry in 1730 or 1731, Franklin was initiated into the local Masonic Lodge. He became a Grand Master in 1734, indicating his rapid rise to prominence in Pennsylvania. 38-39, the same year, he edited and published the first Masonic book in the Americas, a reprint of James Anderson's Constitutions of the Freemasons. He was the secretary of St. John's Lodge in Philadelphia from 1735 to 1738. 39 Franklin remained a Freemason for the rest of his life. 40-41 Common law marriage to Deborah Reed. At age 17 in 1723, Franklin proposed to 15-year-old Deborah Reed while a boarder in the Reed home. At that time, Deborah's mother was wary of allowing her young daughter to marry Franklin, who was on his way to London at Governor Keith's request, and also because of his financial instability. Her own husband had recently died, and she declined Franklin's request to marry her daughter. 19 While Franklin was in London, his trip was extended, and there were problems with the governor's promises of support. Perhaps because of the circumstances of this delay, Deborah married a man named John Rogers. This proved to be a regrettable decision. Rogers shortly avoided his debts and prosecution by fleeing to Barbados with her dowry, leaving her behind. Rogers's fate was unknown, and because of bigamy laws, Deborah was not free to remarry. Citation needed. Franklin established a common law marriage with Deborah on September 1, 1730. They took in his recently acknowledged illegitimate young son and raised him in their household. They had 2 children together. Their son, Francis Folger Franklin, was born in October 1732 and died of smallpox in 1736. Their daughter, Sarah, Sally, Franklin, was born in 1743 and eventually married Richard Batch. 42 Deborah's fear of the sea meant that she never accompanied Franklin on any of his extended trips to Europe. Another possible reason why they spent much time apart is that he may have blamed her for possibly preventing their son Francis from being inoculated against the disease that subsequently killed him. 43 Deborah wrote to him in November 1769, saying she was ill due to dissatisfied distress from his prolonged absence, but he did not return until his business was done. 44. Deborah Reed Franklin died of a stroke on December 14, 1774, while Franklin was on an extended mission to Great Britain. He returned in 1775. 45. William Franklin. In 1730, 24-year-old Franklin publicly acknowledged his illegitimate son William and raised him in his household. William was born on February 22, 1730, but his mother's identity is unknown. 46. He was educated in Philadelphia and beginning at about age 30 studied law in London in the early 1760s. William himself fathered an illegitimate son, William Temple Franklin, born on the same day and month, February 22, 1760. 47. The boy's mother was never identified, and he was placed in foster care. In 1762, the elder William Franklin married Elizabeth Downes, daughter of a planter from Barbados, in London. In 1763, he was appointed as the last royal governor of New Jersey. A loyalist to the king, William Franklin saw his relations with Father Benjamin eventually break down over their differences about the American Revolutionary War, as Benjamin Franklin could never accept William's position. Deposed in 1776 by the revolutionary government of New Jersey, William was placed under house arrest at his home in Perth Amboy for 6 months. After the Declaration of Independence, he was formally taken into custody by order of the Provincial Congress of New Jersey, an entity which he refused to recognize, regarding it as an illegal assembly. 48. He was incarcerated in Connecticut for 2 years, in Wallingford and Middletown, and, after being caught surreptitiously engaging Americans into supporting the Loyalist cause, was held in solitary confinement at Litchfield for 8 months. When finally released in a prisoner exchange in 1778, he moved to New York City, which was occupied by the British at the time. 49. While in New York City, he became leader of the Board of Associated Loyalists, a quasi-military organization chartered by King George III and headquartered in New York City. They initiated guerrilla forays into New Jersey, southern Connecticut, and New York counties north of the city. 50. When British troops evacuated from New York, William Franklin left with them and sailed to England. He settled in London, never to return to North America. In the preliminary peace talks in 1782 with Britain, Benjamin Franklin insisted that Loyalists who had borne arms against the United States would be excluded from this plea, that they be given a general pardon. He was undoubtedly thinking of William Franklin. 51. Unreliable source. Success as an author. In 1733, Franklin began to publish the noted Poor Richard's Almanac, with content both original and borrowed, under the pseudonym Richard Saunders, on which much of his popular reputation is based. He frequently wrote under pseudonyms. He had developed a distinct, signature style that was plain, pragmatic and had a sly, soft but self-deprecating tone with declarative sentences. 52. Although it was no secret that he was the author, his Richard Saunders character repeatedly denied it. Poor Richard's proverbs, adages from this almanac, such as, "A penny saved is twopence dear," often misquoted as, "A penny saved is a penny earned," and, "Fish and visitors stink in 3 days," remain common quotations in the modern world. Wisdom in folk society meant the ability to provide an apt adage for any occasion, and his readers became well prepared. He sold about 10,000 copies per year. It became an institution. 53. In 1741, Franklin began publishing the General Magazine and Historical Chronicle for all the British plantations in America. He used the heraldic badge of the Prince of Wales as the cover illustration. In 1758, the year he ceased writing for the almanac, he printed Father Abraham's Sermon, also known as The Way to Wealth. Franklin's autobiography, begun in 1771 but published after his death, has become one of the classics of the genre. Citation needed. He wrote a letter, Advice to a Friend on Choosing a Mistress, dated June 25, 1745, in which he gives advice to a young man about channeling sexual urges. Due to its licentious nature, it was not published in collections of his papers during the 19th century. Federal court decisions from the mid to late 20th century cited the document as a reason for overturning obscenity laws, using it to make a case against censorship. 54. Thank you for watching. Hopefully it's useful. Don't forget to like, comment, share and subscribe. See you in the next video.